Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inclusive Collective, where we share stories and learnings of inclusive people, organizations, and innovation. I am your co-host, Rob Hadley, a people and culture strategist specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion and people analytics. I'm here with my friend, Nadia Butt, an organizational development and belonging strategist. Nadia, welcome to another week. How you doing?
Well, I was just gonna say welcome to you too. I'm doing well, Rob. How are you this week?
I am wonderful. And
Yeah.
as you know, it's kind of end of the year. I did a question for you.
Oh,
As
here we go.
you're a consultant, right?
Yeah.
You got clients.
Do some of this work. Sure.
What do you do? Do you do like corporate gifts end of the year?
That
Do you
is
give out gifts?
wait, did I
Maybe
tell
I'm
you?
putting you on the spot. No, no,
No,
tell
no,
me. Tell me.
no.
What do you
This
do?
is just so interesting that you brought this up. I don't think I shared this with you. I don't give gifts. I send holiday cards. I think that that's like just as a nice gesture from a consultant to like clients or, business partners that you worked with. But what I thought was really kind, Rob, was I received an email from a client who said, "We really want to celebrate and honor I'm totally like paraphrasing here, but
Sure.
we want to, as the organization, we want to celebrate and honor the holidays in your honor." And so we have picked and narrowed down like to 3 different nonprofit organizations in our local area that we would love for you to pick, and we will
Mm-hmm.
contribute in your honor.
I
And
like
I
it.
thought that was this I literally got so teary-eyed. It was
Yeah.
just a really sweet gesture,
Uh,
for that organization to donate in my name to a local organization of their choosing?
yeah. Yeah. I
And they
love that.
even offered from if there was an organization that I was aligned to that they would prefer me to donate to. Just thought it was really sweet.
Nice, nice. I did that at my wedding actually many years ago.
You
I don't
did?
think people liked it though. I think they wanted like some sort of tote bag or something.
Yeah, they wanted a favor.
There, yeah. Yeah. I flew all the way out
Where's my
here and you're gonna
candle?
give the money to someone else?
Yeah, right. Do
Um,
you give gifts, like
well,
corporate
I'm
gifts out or?
I'm going to. It's just, you get super busy, right? Like everyone wants you to do work at the end of the year. And so I think it's gonna be more like a New Year's thing. But so
Yeah.
I think you're supposed to as a consultant, you're supposed to give it earlier in the cycle. Should be like showing
Oh,
up early December. I think I'm a little bit behind, but
well, yeah. There's a
okay.
lot
So
that happens, yeah.
so you're not gonna get yours for a while. So yeah,
That's fair.
since
You
you're
probably aren't gonna get one, so
hey,
happy
on
holidays
that note,
on that note.
what are we doing today, Nadia?
Yeah, so this week on Inclusive Collective, we will be talking to Frederique Irwin, president of the National Women's History Museum. We'll discuss a new technology that aims to eliminate mass shootings and a very important Supreme Court case on discrimination. We'll also be ranting and raving this week. You'll rant on medical schools, and I'll be raving on workplace religious inclusion.
Yeah,
So,
what's first on our itinerary here?
yeah. So this was a really interesting story. Yahoo News shared an article about a software company, Wave Welcome. It's a Maryland startup that's using AI and drones to essentially tackle America's gun violence epidemic. It's really cool because this particular product would alert police to an armed intruder and deliver a live stream before any bystander calls 911. So the founder, Bernard Wright, he's the founder of Way Welcome. He's one of the few Black founders in the AI space and is someone addressing the issue of gun violence, particularly like in his community in Maryland, where gun violence is prevalent. But more particular, there was something happened last year that really kind of drew him to this. And of course, we all know gun violence disproportionately impacts minority communities. And I thought this was really important to bring up. Just this person is a Black founder, advocating for more representation in tech, as well as in the startup community. So I'll pause there for comments.
Well, I hate this, Nadia.
Mm. You hate that we have to even do this,
I
right?
you know where I'm going, right? Like,
I
so what? First
do.
of all, let's say I don't love it, right? So it feels very Minority Report to me. First of all,
Mm.
right? Like someone is detected of having something, the police are alerted, and drones are following us around, things like that. Do you like that? Do you know the movie I'm talking about?
No.
Minority Report. Okay, it's like Tom Cruise movie.
Oh
Check it
yeah,
out.
yeah. No, I
Yeah,
don't remember seeing. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I think that it's a good thing that And I think that there's an opportunity that if there's a Black man developing this technology, has a better chance of thinking through some of the bias that could be
Hmm.
in the algorithm and maybe
Yeah.
mitigating some of the damage. But if he can do it, then someone else can, right? And so you think about some of the more nefarious versions of this, right? So
Yeah.
Black teens in hoodies go into a store and there's an alert, and things are following them around. Or
Yeah.
you're a Muslim. Think about all the ways that this could be used to watch folks based on various stereotypes as well. So
Sure.
so I you know what I think, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I appreciate him locating the business in a predominantly Black area, but this is really a failure of policy, right? Like, so no one's building this business in Finland or Japan, places that they have every bit of the technological capabilities that we have,
Hmm.
but they don't have to because they have strong and enforced gun laws, right?
Yeah.
And so seems like a great guy, but we could eliminate the need for this idea
Yeah.
tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
With policy.
With
So,
policy. Yeah. You're spot
so
on.
sorry, but
No,
great seems like a great guy.
yeah, seems like a great guy. No, and you're spot on, and thank you for sharing that. I shared this article one because I really was drawn to like the lack of funding capital Black
Yep,
founders receive and how underrepresented in business and in tech they are, and so absolutely, your point is well taken. And we can still do better, kind of in that startup founder
for sure.
VC space, right?
We should have him on. He seems like a really
Yeah,
interesting and entrepreneurship
yeah.
entrepreneur.
I'll reach
So
out to
yeah, let's do it.
him.
All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court. I like to put on my lawyer hat. I like to do
Oh
a little
yeah.
lawyering.
I was waiting for that. I've been
Little
waiting for
lawyering.
that.
This past week, oral arguments were made in front of the Supreme Court,
Mm,
right? Supreme Court. In the case of Muldrow versus the city of St. Louis, the petitioner, Jatanya Muldrow of the St. Louis Police Department, argued that her 8-month transfer out of the department's intelligence division constituted discrimination within the meaning of Title VII, even though she had not suffered any economic damages as a result of her transfer. So, a
mm,
reminder, Title VII, Rob doing his lawyering thing,
yeah.
protects people from discrimination on the basis of race, gender, disability, things we call protected categories. In some jurisdictions, Nadia,
Mhm.
you have to prove that your employer's action constituted a significant disadvantage.
Right.
So why in some places is there one rule, in some places another? Because nothing makes sense. It's stupid.
Yeah.
There's no, but
Yeah.
in the Muldrow case, the officer had certain privileges and access and prestige taken away,
Mm,
but was not fired. So let me pause.
yeah.
Should people be allowed to claim discrimination if they've not been fired, but have just been treated worse? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question because, like, when I was reading this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, job transfers, right? Like, what about demotions? Like,
Yeah.
just because you are not eliminated from your job, like, yeah, of course there's a discrimination in the process." So,
Yes. The answer is yes.
yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
But we have a twist, right?
Yes,
So,
always.
and apparently conservative justices, including my old drinking buddy, Brett Kavanaugh, very, very open to this because according to our friends at Jackson Lewis, they believe that it'll open the door to expanded claims against DEI programs like
Right.
mentorship, programs to correct underrepresentation, et cetera. So if you can prove that you were harmed by a transfer or demotion into some sort of a lower job, then I can prove that I was harmed because I'm not eligible for your mentorship program. And if you don't think this will happen, you just haven't been
Yeah.
listening to the Inclusive Collective podcast
Yeah.
for the last few months. So,
Right.
so now tell me, what do you think about
No,
this?
I mean, yes, but this goes back to this really goes back to what is your intention and purpose around things like ERG groups or affinity groups, like any sort of DE. This is why I hate separating DE and I as like a separate entity in a business because
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be separate. It just has to be the way you do work and the way you behave and the way you treat each other and treat people because the problem is if you don't have clear intentions or a clear purpose, then, there's so many legal ramifications or suits or claims that people will pose. And what this goes back to is really trying to think through intentionally what is it that you're like, don't create something because it's just trendy, because
Mm,
an ERG is a trendy thing to do. You have to really think through what is the problem that you're trying to solve for? What's the data telling you that this solution is the best one? And really just making sure you're checking in with your legal team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you gotta have a good lawyer.
Lawyer up, lawyer up. I should have gone to law school, right?
I
So
know. You missed your calling.
there's going to be a lot of need for lawyers going forward. So we'll see how this turns out. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I think what do they do? I think they hear oral arguments, then they go sit by the pool and read them again, and then
Oh,
then they make a decision sometime in June or later this
the
year. So
pool or the slopes?
well, it was yeah. There could be this pool, there could be the slopes,
Yeah.
right? Like whatever, a bunch of people that
Yeah.
were whatever. Um, so anyway, we'll see how that turns out. Thanks for that, Nadia. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be with Frederique Irwin of the National Women's History Museum. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Inclusive Collective. Our guest today is Frederique Irwin. She's the president and CEO of the National Women's History Museum. Fred has more than 25 years of experience in strategic management, nonprofit and commercial business, operations, impact, and entrepreneurship. She previously served as managing director of impact strategy at the Sorensen Impact Center, where she managed high-level partnerships with leading organizations in the social impact sector and led initiatives around improving equity in higher education and driving systems level change for equity in women in entrepreneurship. She also was the founder and CEO of Her Corner, a company educating women on how to scale their businesses. She expanded Her Corner across multiple cities in the US and was a frequent speaker on the state of entrepreneurship for women in the US and helped thousands of women-owned businesses scale. Her work supporting women earned her a spot as a New Zealand Edmund Hillary Fellow, a global fellowship for impact leaders. She has taught business management, entrepreneurship, and organizational behavior at the Kogod School of Business at American University. Frederique holds an MBA from the Graduate School of Business, College of William and Mary, and a Bachelor of Arts in Russian Studies from Davidson College. She's a dual citizen of the United States and the European Union. She is fluent in English, French, Spanish, and conversant in Russian. Oh, Katila. Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Frederique Irwin, so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Inclusive Collective.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. And I think I'm going to have to shorten up that intro.
Well, it is quite impressive, and thank you so much for joining us this week. I'll go ahead with the first kind of question. So, your career in social work has been super inspiring. Really focused on social injustices and challenges across the states as well as global. And now you serve as the president of the National Women's History Museum. So, tell us more about like what drew you to this role. Um, you know, in this this particular museum at this time in your life and in history.
I have been president and CEO of the National Women's History Museum now for a little over 7 months. And I came to this role in the slightly circuitous route because I don't come from the museum historian type of background. In fact, I've recently learned that I'm what's referred to as museum adjacent and part of this trend, if you will, of bringing folks from the for profit or entrepreneurial space into some of these social impact organizations. And part of what drew me specifically to this museum was the fact that it's been around for 27 years. And one of its most significant accomplishments was that in 2021, it got Congress to appropriate and agree to fund a future American Women's History Museum as part of the Smithsonian, which is great, except it's a long process. It can take 10 years on the short end, 12, 15 on the perhaps longer end. And for me personally, I was drawn to this role because I realized, women are half the population and we need women more than ever to be part of the solution, to feel a sense of efficacy and confidence in their ability to jump in and help solve whatever social issue we're facing today. And there are many.
There are many, and that's you jumped into it, so it's obviously a very critical time as well. And so, and you're taking over at this very interesting time for women. And when you think about the last couple of years, we've seen rollbacks in women's rights, access to care. We also see a lot of firsts here, right? So every week we're talking about some sort of a new first for in terms of progress for women. And so, you know, so I didn't know if I want to jump in this early, but where do you see the state of play for women here at the end of 2023? What do you have your eye on?
I mean, I don't know what first you're seeing, but I don't see very many of them. Well, maybe I'm looking at the broader picture. When
Yeah.
I'm looking at the broader picture, I'm looking at the fact that we still have less than 30% female representation in Congress and the Senate, less than 10% of women CEOs nationally. It's less than
Mm.
30% women on boards. Then you start looking at women in STEM and some of the, AI fields. So I'm not saying that there's not progress that's continuing to be made, but I am a little disheartened about the state of affairs for women in general, not just in this country right now, but
Mm.
also globally. And I think that the fundamental reason it's so important that the National Women's History Museum get information about women's history and women's accomplishments out to people out there today is that if you've never heard or seen or even known that some of these women have achieved all this stuff already or worked so hard on, then you're less likely to imagine yourself able to be part of the solution.
Mhm.
And we know for a fact that if you look at what's taught in this country across social studies classes, less than 15% is about women's history. And
Mm,
by the way, of that 15%, half is in a domestic capacity. Like, oh, Martha was married to George. So,
right.
Right. Yep.
so
I
yeah,
know, such a sigh, right? Like,
I know. Because, and Rob, I think, what you hit on it, right? I mean, my daughter has fewer rights today than I did at her age, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a big deal. It's a big.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
well, I'm curious, like when you started, I'm I don't want to make an assumption, but like, do you feel that maybe you didn't know everything about women's history? And I'm just so curious, like, what have you learned to date since you started that's like new for you that maybe surprised you? Is there something that over the course of the last, few months that you've been a part of the organization that has been brought to your attention that you didn't know previously and that really is just such a really cool piece of information to know?
I mean, honestly, Nadia, there's so much I didn't know that I
Yeah.
still don't know. um,
Yep. Sure.
and And every single day, I feel like I'm learning more and more stories about women. So for example, right before we hopped on, I was looking at an online exhibit we're launching on Monday on Title IX
Mhm.
and the history of Title IX. And, the women that were really genuinely involved, like Patsy Mink, in terms of changing these laws. But last month, for example, I was in Chicago where we worked with the U.S. Mint to launch quarters that have
Hmm.
women on them. And
Mhm.
so the quarter that was released last month was Maria Tallchief. And she was not only the first American prima ballerina, she was also the first Native American prima ballerina in this country. And so I feel like I'm learning about these women like all the time. And like the question is always, how come I didn't know about this? How come I didn't know about
Right.
her? Mm. And that's really the state of affair. I will never learn everything there is because I've spent the first 50 years of my life having half of that information not really integrated into my studies to begin with.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, just 10, 15 minutes on your website and I learned, 10, 15 things, right? Like,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I'd never seen before. And so, and really so much about being a modern museum is about how do you engage through technology, especially engaging young people, students, so what are what are you doing in this area? What are your priorities and what does the museum of the future need to think about really around technology?
Oh my gosh, we are all in on technology. One of the things when I first came to the museum and I started thinking about strategic plan, I realized that one of the things we really had going for us was the fact that we started in 1997 as an online museum
Hmm.
because we were
Okay.
trying to get a brick and mortar location, but we started at it by just putting everything online. And we now have nearly 30 years of digital content in a time where there's artificial intelligence scraping the internet. So we're not trying to digitize everything. But the biggest change that we are implementing is rethinking our direct to consumer channels. And so we focus really on two primary audiences. One are the K through 12 educators, the teachers out there,
Hmm.
who 87% of whom say that they have to go outside the classroom to look for content to teach on women's history. And so we see them as our primary demographic. But the other demographic is folks between the ages of 5 to 30. And specifically because we think that in the long run, if we can teach them about women's history and women's accomplishments and how it relates to what's going on today, that demographic can have the largest impact in terms of shrinking the gender equality gap in this country. And
Mhm.
so the thing is that 5 to 30 is a broad range.
Yeah,
And
of course.
so we've had to really break down the 5 to 10 year olds and the 10 to 14 and then 14 to 18 and then 18 and beyond and really think about how they consume information. And so we are developing along with a series of a variety of different partners, repurpose content, whether that's with influencers, whether that's with gaming
Hmm.
solutions, whether that's with shorts on YouTube's, because teachers are using those for their kindergartners, you know.
Hmm.
So we are really in the process of developing a new end-to-end tech solution and strategy so that mm, we can not only continue to create content, but co-create with others and aggregate what is already out there to make sure that people know it's true.
I love that. And such a great mix of like different generations and understanding what their learning modes or needs are. I'm curious, how else does the museum think about different dimensions of diversity in women's history? So if you think about, the various dimensions, race, age, class, all of kind of the different, I mean, I know you can't hit upon all of them, but just the various dimensions, is there priorities that you have set for 2024 just in terms of how you folks would think about that?
You know, that's specifically a question for our education team. So I'm not sure how, which specific target which bodies of work they're targeting in 2024. But I can tell you that the exhibit that we recently opened in DC. So part of what we are doing is, while we're not going to open up a physical building ourselves, that's going to be for the future Smithsonian. We are launching these small exhibits and putting them across the country in places that we believe to be highly accessible. And so we tested this out at the MLK Library here in Washington, D.C. And we specifically said, who are the women who were local to Washington who made such an impact in this city, but at a national level? And
Mhm.
so we actually decided to do an entire exhibit called We Who Believe in Freedom, Black Feminist DC. And it's about 18 to 20 African American women whom you and I have probably, for the
Hmm.
most part, never heard of because they
Mhm.
weren't in our textbooks. And what they did for civil liberty, for reproductive rights, for just justice in general, for all, not just for women, but for LGBTQ and like so many other folks. It's really Black feminism elevates so many rights for so many people.
Mhm.
And so that's been a really powerful exhibit to have, downtown Washington, DC. And we've
In a
got,
really beautiful library too.
in
I
a,
love the MLK
yeah,
library.
and
Yeah.
it's highly accessible, right? So lots of kids, lots of people walking by and being like, hey, what's this? So,
Mhm.
anyways.
I want to talk about also your or hit on your expertise in terms of helping women build and scale businesses, and and also hit on some of the frustration that you talked about earlier in terms of women's entrepreneurship or investment in women run businesses. And so, yeah, I don't know if you still drawing from that expertise as well, but how do you think about drawing from what you did there and how it impacts your current role? Is there any kind of overlap?
Yeah, on two levels. The first is that I think that coming from an entrepreneurial background is quite helpful when you're
Hmm.
trying to launch and grow and rebuild a complete national strategy. And I'm not afraid of trying something and repivoting if it doesn't work. So I think that helps enormously, that background. Um, the other thing is, I have been all in on women's empowerment probably since high school.
Hmm.
A handful. And it's been definitely the common thread across my entire trajectory, career wise. What's interesting is that when I first started my company, Her Corner, it was really a point to point solution where I would build groups and we would offer individual coaching. And we were trying to hit women kind of as many as we could, but there was a limit to how many we could help. So then I went to Sorensen and I was like, let me think about this from a systems level perspective. What
Hmm.
if we start integrating policy and large donors and thought, think tanks? And what if we put all of that together? Can we change some of the barriers women and marginalized communities are facing in equity in a variety of different ways? And then what I realized there was, oh my gosh, that just takes so freaking long. So part of
Mhm.
the reason that I came here is I thought, okay, if I really want to change the game in terms of gender equality, I need to do it in a different way. And so here I'm using kind of the women's history and our are channeling into technology as a way, hopefully, to get to even more women to really, hopefully, compel them to act, not
Mhm.
only for themselves or for others, but also for the world.
I
So,
love that.
Yeah.
So that it's so inspiring and fantastic, and I think our listeners will definitely take away, some of what you said, and what I'm really curious about to hear from you is like, what if you were to give a recommendation to our listeners of a resource, other than going to the museum and checking it out? Is there anything that you could provide to us in terms of a resource, to help us think a little bit more about women's history?
well, yes, womenshistory.org, which should be their first step. But what's
Mhm.
really interesting to me is that the resources are evolving. So, in my number one piece of advice is check your sources,
Mm,
because my kids, for example, I have a high schooler who, when she's doing a paper on a certain person these days, she's not Googling it. She's not necessarily going to my website. She's going to an app that generally has artificial intelligence integrated and having a direct conversation with a historical person
mm,
about their life. So they want it faster, right? They want to say like, "Hey, Susan B. Anthony, like, when were you born? What did you do? When did you get arrested? Like, did you have any kids? Did you get married?" Right? They want to have
Right.
like that level of interaction and not be reading the bios, not be reading the. And so I've been checking a lot of these apps, and the truth is that some of them are good. Most of them are not fully representative or inclusive, not always accurate.
Mm.
right.
So I think that that's my biggest piece of advice, is that in this day and age, checking sources is really, really important.
Yeah.
Do you think about partnerships with you in terms of your organization with folks in order to create less biased applications like that?
100% Rob. Like that's probably the biggest element of our strategy, our growth strategy, is that while we'll continue to create our own content, our biggest objective is to co-create with others as well as aggregate. And so I want to co-create with organizations that are out there that are telling, stories and historical documentation that perhaps we haven't gotten to yet,
Hmm.
and co-create it with them and then put it through our channels. I want to then go around and create a process to actually say like, this app is highly a trusted source or accurate or whatever, because I want to go as broadly as we can to push as much information about women and their accomplishments and their history forward as possible. I don't want to be just one lane here. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I can't think of a better person to do it. You and I know each other from before your time there at the National Women's History Museum. But when you told me that this is the role that you were going to take, I thought immediately, wow, they couldn't have chosen a better person to lead, you know, at this time for women. And so, very very excited to see what you come up with next and where you can take the organization and the museum. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me and for your interest and curiosity on, what we're doing in museums of the future and all that sort of stuff. I really appreciate it.
We'll be right back with more Inclusive Collective right after this.
Welcome back, folks. We just finished chatting with Frederique Irwin of the National Women's History Museum. Really great conversation. Rob, what were your thoughts? Any takeaways?
No, I'm so stuck on, like I wasn't joking that when I went to their website and just glancing around, doing
Hmm.
research on Fred and her focus in terms of building out that museum, that there's just so much that you think about who gets to decide who presents history. And for, most of our history here in the United States, that had not, and certainly not women of color as well. And so there's just so much that I learned and spend a little bit of time there. And you feel like you really need to dive in a little bit more. So you feel inadequate in terms of your understanding of the history of the country when you
Yeah.
spend a little bit of time on that website. How about you?
Yeah, I think like her reminding us of trusted sources is
Mm,
so critical, especially in this moment in time. But I appreciate her reminder of that, and just like their focus of their partners that they're, working with on who could be a trusted source and so forth. So, yeah, just a overall really great conversation. Love the work that they're doing there. Really wish them well, and I can't wait to go check it out in person. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah,
VIP
V-
tour.
VIP.
All right. Well, thanks again for Frederique Irwin. All right. Well, it's time for rants and raves. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off.
Sure.
I'm going to rant. You might remember that what I call the not at all partisan and totally legitimate Supreme Court, that they banned affirmative action in higher education. We may have mentioned this or talked about it once or twice
We
on this
did.
program, right? So, but before that, the High Court's June ruling, a handful of states had already banned race-conscious admissions in medical school, right? And reported in Bloomberg, their elimination of affirmative action resulted in a 37% decline underrepresented students in medical school relative to the states that still allowed it. And when my spouse, who is a physician and knows a thing or two about this, when I sent that article from Bloomberg to her, she reminded me that was the goal. That's exactly what was intended. It is working, and so we're a little bit sad and frustrated by that.
Yeah. Yep. Well, let's end on a happy note. So, this is just I read an article that leaders of companies are open to the idea of creating faith-based employee resource groups, like providing those who are part of some form of like religious denomination of Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. So like this comes out of kind of the rise that we see right now in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim and anti-Arab discrimination, hate crimes and bias, of course, across the states. And so a good way to provide a safe space to employees and show allyship is creating something like an ERG. But what I will just say, kind of wrapping up what we had talked about earlier, or tapping upon what we talked about earlier, is just be sure you're clear with your purpose and intentions when creating them. But yeah, just saw that. Think leaders are maybe starting to listen and lean into the faith-based needs of organizations.
Very cool.
Or of employees.
Very cool. Very cool. And something that a few years ago you couldn't get done. And now people are starting to realize that these are important conversations to have in organizations. So thank you for that. And just before we head out, I do want to plug. So we had Fred on earlier. And so one of the things we didn't talk about was that National History Women's Museum, womenshistory.org. There's a really cool, I don't know if you checked it out, but there's a really cool shop online with really cool women's history apparel, gifts, and things like that. So definitely check that out. I think, if you're looking for
Is that where you're going to get all your corporate gifts
a unique corporate or holiday gift, I think is a good idea. So
awesome. Well, that's it for Inclusive Collective. Just a reminder to folks that if you're looking for DE&I in workplace culture, strategy, consulting, problem solving, or training, you can reach me at Nadia at nasconsultants.com and Rob at TacanoConsulting.com. Inclusive Collective is a production of Rifelion Media. We would love to hear from you, so please send us your feedback at inclusivecollective@rifelion.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn so you can subscribe to our Inclusive Collective newsletter. If you like what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and rate us. We like 5 stars wherever you get your podcast today. Thanks again to our guest, Frederique Irwin. We'll be back next week. Be well.
Money.